welcome. I'm James Milan, and I'm here with Maura Healey, who is the Democratic candidate for Attorney General. Thanks for participating.
Hi, James. Great to be here.
We're going to get right to reviewing the format of the interview. This will be a live-to-tape interview, and that means no edits once we begin. There was no pre-screening of questions, and answers will be limited to 2 minutes each. We will start with a 1-minute opening statement from the candidate, and after the questions, we will conclude with a 1-minute closing statement. So, Ms. Healey, you have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Maura Healey, and I'm a Democratic candidate for Attorney General. I'm running for Attorney General because I have the experience to use that power in that office to make a difference in people's lives. Over the past 7 years, I've been in that office, first as head of the Civil Rights Division, later as head of 2 major bureaus. And at the time I stepped down to run for office, I was overseeing 250 of the 500 lawyers and staff in that office. The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer, the people's attorney, with oversight of a 500-person public law firm. I've had the experience in that office, building cases, leading investigations, negotiating settlements, advising state agencies, and day in and day out, working to use the law to fight for people here in this state. We took on predatory lenders and mortgage brokers. We led the fight on civil rights and stood up to the federal government to defeat DOMA. And we fought for women's access to reproductive health care.
Sorry to cut you off, but we're going to get right to the questions now.
Sure.
And I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but I will anyway, that there will be a 2-minute time limit, and we will observe that pretty strictly, or very strictly. So to begin with, why are you running for Attorney General, and what prepares you to serve in this capacity?
Well, my career as a lawyer has been in private practice as a litigator, as a special assistant district attorney here in Middlesex County, as head of the Civil Rights Division, and later as chief of the Public Protection Bureau and the Business and Labor Bureau in Attorney General Martha Coakley's office. And I'm running because I want to use my experience to use the powers of that office to make a difference in people's lives. That has meant, in my experience in the office, bringing lawsuits, taking on banks and mortgage brokers, fighting foreclosures, standing up for civil rights. I actually built the case and argued and won the case where we challenged the federal government on behalf of married gay couples here in this state to defeat DOMA. It's the first case in the country to strike down that law. And I worked on fighting for women's access to reproductive health care, defending the buffer zone law, and working to ensure safety in our schools. I also worked to negotiate nationwide settlements on behalf of people with disabilities, and I understand how you can use the power of that office and the work of the Attorney General to make a difference here in people's lives, and I want to do that. To lead on criminal justice reform, to reduce gun violence, to fight for access to women's reproductive health care, to fight for consumers, protect the elderly, protect consumers, and to ensure that we have integrity and accountability in our government. These are the reasons I run.
That's great, thank you. As the Attorney General of Massachusetts, I think you already cited this to some degree, but you would serve as, quote, the chief lawyer and law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth. Can you briefly explain what that entails, and if you think that the current Attorney General has successfully fulfilled her duties? And then if you can give us specific examples to justify your answer.
Sure. So I think about the Attorney General's office as the people's law firm. There are 500 lawyers and staff and investigators in that office who are working day in and day out on behalf of any number of issues, preparing cases, overseeing and working on investigations into companies that haven't played by the rules, for example. One matter that I worked on was a case where we sued a mortgage broker and a bank for their unfair lending practices. You remember back at the start of the recession and the meltdown here, we started to learn about predatory lending practices, and we saw the devastation caused by some of those really bad subprime lending practices. And in the Attorney General's office, we put together cases, and we took on those banks, and we took on those brokers in court, and we made it so that it is now illegal to make a mortgage to somebody in the state when you know they can't afford it. We fought against unnecessary and unlawful foreclosures and kept a lot of families in their homes. In the same way, I worked on a case and actually led the case where we took on the federal government and sued over the Defense of Marriage Act. And that was a case that was filed here in a federal court in Boston by the Attorney General's office. I was lead counsel in that state, in that case. And that's an example of the work that you do in the AG's office. You also represent the state when the state is sued or finds itself needing to take legal positions in court. And the job of the Attorney General is to make the strategic decisions, decide what battles to take on, make sure that you have the teams in place to litigate and to win those cases, and really to make sure that you're there day in and day out fighting for people and standing up for people and using the law to do just that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The Attorney General of Massachusetts oversees an office, as you've also mentioned, with multiple bureaus and missions. Mm-hmm. So what executive experience do you have to allow you to serve successfully in that capacity?
Well, I come directly out of Attorney General Martha Coakley's office, and I think that Attorney General Coakley has been a fantastic Attorney General, not just for Massachusetts, but really nationally when you think about the work that was done to get after Wall Street and some of the abuses there when it came to lending, to the fight around civil rights and standing up for people. And I started in that office out of private practice. I took James a 70% pay cut many years ago to leave private law practice to join the Attorney General's office as head of the Civil Rights Division. And from there, I was promoted to overseeing the Public Protection Bureau, which had oversight over issues related to the environment and consumer issues, healthcare, insurance and financial services, and then in time was also asked to run the Business and Labor Bureau. So I had oversight over half of the attorneys and staff in that office, over a dozen divisions. I am the only candidate in this race who brings direct management experience, leading teams, leading divisions, leading bureaus within that office. I also have some other experiences. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, a natural leader in some sense, and in all the teams that I played on through high school and college, I was a captain, and I'm used to leading. I was a basketball player and a point guard, and some say that the point guard is sort of the leader on the floor. So leadership and management and executive function is something that comes naturally to me. I've been doing that in the Attorney General's office, and certainly that is something that is required of the Attorney General when you think about the powers that she has and the ways in which she can use that office to enforce the law, to make a difference in people's lives here.
Thank you. What do you think are the most critical civil rights issues facing the residents of Massachusetts, and how might the Office of the Attorney General address those issues?
Well, there are so many civil rights issues. I mentioned the DOMA case where we were fighting on behalf of LGBT people and gay couples here in this state who were told by our own federal government, you're not married. Even though you've been given a state marriage license, you're not really married, and therefore you're not entitled to Social Security or Medicaid or other benefits and protections other married couples enjoyed. And obviously folks know what happened there. We took that on and we won. But there's more work to do when it comes to fighting for marriage equality nationally, standing up here for the rights of transgender people here in the state who still need protections. When I think about race, we still have a long ways to go. I brought cases where there was discrimination in lending practices or in housing and rental practices. We have more work to do. Work on behalf of people with disabilities who, you know, whether it's looking for work, looking for housing, looking to access the internet even, and aren't able to use technology in the same way because companies haven't made their technology accessible. These are all things that I worked on in investigations and cases that I led in the office. So we have more work to do in that area. Part of it is about being out there in the community, talking to people, making sure they understand their rights. That's very important, the education component of the Attorney General's office. And then taking action when there are complaints of discrimination. Somebody gets denied an apartment, somebody gets denied a job. somebody isn't able to get into a building because it wasn't made in an accessible way. These are all things that we need to continue to work on out of the Attorney General's office. And I certainly put in that category gun violence. When I think about the disproportionate effect it's having on some of our urban communities, communities of color, that is why I'm leading the charge on attacking gun violence as part of my agenda.
Thank you. Can you please give us 2 examples of how you think the Office of the Attorney General could have done more or better during the last 4 years? And if elected, what changes would you envision for the office?
Well, I think it is so important that the attorney be there as a really strong advocate to protect people from predatory practices. And I think we did a really good job when it came to addressing some of the really problematic practices in the lending industry, in the mortgage lending industry. But there's more work to be done. And one area I think I want to do more work is in the area of predatory for-profit schools. And James, we've got a lot of entities out there. Some of them advertise on the Red Line or on TV. They pretend to be these schools that offer certificates and programs where you can go and learn to be a medical technician. And they use a lot of high-pressure sales tactics. They spend all of their money marketing to students, not on actually educating students. And unfortunately, we have a lot of students, veterans, a lot of single mothers who are looking for a little economic mobility through education who end up signing up, going to these schools. They get certificates of no value, classes don't really exist, and then they're left with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. So we need education to make the public aware of these predatory practices, and we need to take enforcement action against these predatory practices to shut them down. Same thing when it comes to seniors. I look at our demographic, and we have an aging demographic, and you see companies out there looking to prey on seniors through different financial products. And it's really important that we get after those companies and shut them down so that people who are vulnerable aren't taken advantage of. So those are some things I want to do. Also, I'm very committed to ensuring that if we see casinos going forward, and I am anti-casino, I hope we don't see casinos, my vote will be no in November, that we have an Attorney General's office who's going to hold casino operators' feet to the fire and vigorously enforce consumer protection and public safety laws.
We're going to move along, but thank you. What specific proposals would you seek to implement to help the Commonwealth and its residents in the area of consumer protection?
Well, there are many. I just referred to a couple. One is leading the charge against predatory for-profit schools, getting after high rates of student loans and unfair student lending practices, taking on actions and companies that are preying on seniors and scamming them. And, more broadly speaking, when it comes to consumer issues, making sure that consumers who need health care, women in particular who need access to reproductive health care, have that access. We have a new law here in place, the Safe Access Law, that is passed in the wake of a very bad Supreme Court decision striking down our buffer zone law a couple months ago. It's up to the Attorney General to enforce that law, and I will, because it's really, really important that women have access to reproductive health care. And that's also a consumer issue, in my view. So those are some of the things that I'm focused on.
Thank you. What role does the Attorney General's office play in helping the state economy, creating jobs, attracting new business, and keeping existing businesses from leaving the state?
Well, and this relates to the last question. I have to say, I think the single greatest consumer issue facing the state is casinos, potentially. And this is a big difference in this race for Attorney General. My opponent supports casinos, has supported casinos since the beginning of this race, and had some involvement in a gaming industry of his own. I oppose casinos because I think as a consumer advocate, they hurt people. You see predatory lending, you see unfair debt collection, you see addiction, you see issues with public safety. And so I think that we need somebody as Attorney General who understands that and who comes with that frame of reference, especially if the voters decide that we're going to see gaming going forward. And I say that because casinos, to me, aren't an economic solution or an economic driver. When you look at the number of jobs that have been shed at places like Foxwoods, or you see casinos in Atlantic City shutting down. I think the market is saturated. New York is building 4 of their own, and it's not very hard for Massachusetts folks to get to Springfield, for example, to get to New York, for example. So that's an example of something that I wouldn't support as an economic driver. But let's face it, we're in Massachusetts. We have wonderful schools and universities. We have a really educated workforce, a lot of human capital and talent here. As Attorney General, when it comes to regulating business, I will look for ways to support business development and economic development and growth that grows jobs. I know that, James, a lot of that is left for the governor and for others, but certainly as Attorney General, I will do everything I can to support economic development. And that means being fair about regulation and being smart and pragmatic and finding ways to support while making sure the public's protected.
Please give us one example of an issue that you and your opponents agree on, and 2 examples of issues on which you differ, and why your own positions represent the best interests of the Commonwealth.
Well, I think that a really important area is gun violence, and one thing that both my opponent and I agree on is that we need to make use of smart gun technology, fingerprint technology, when it comes to new guns that are being made. We both support using fingerprint technology on new guns so that only those who actually have a fingerprint matched to the gun are able to fire that gun. And that's a matter of public safety that we both agree on. Here's where we differ on the issue. I think we need to do more than that. I think that reducing gun violence is more than just smart gun technology. We need to do that, but that's just a piece of a much larger puzzle. And this is a difference between my opponent and I. I come to this as a civil rights lawyer, as a former prosecutor, and as somebody with experience in the Attorney General's office. We've got a new gun law here, and our next Attorney General should be working hard to implement and enforce that law. That means cutting down on gun trafficking, getting resources to at-risk kids, early childhood violence intervention programs, supporting mental health services. We've got a lot of gun deaths by suicide, for example, still in this state, and we need to increase and make available services for mental health and behavioral health needs. And we need to give police the tools to better trace guns and criminal activity. And so, to me, in order to really get at gun violence and to reduce it, you need to come with a whole package of solutions and proposals. And that's what I've done. It's not just smart gun technology, it's smart gun technology plus a whole lot more. And I think you saw that with the legislation, and it's why I have the support of someone like Jack McDevitt, the Northeastern criminologist who just advised the state legislature on gun reform. So I look forward, if elected as Attorney General, to enforcing that law.
Thank you. And the last question is, what strategies would you use for working with members of other parties and those of opposing views? And what experience do you have implementing such strategies?
Well, over the last 7 years in state government, I've had the opportunity to work with folks from any number of political parties and folks with any number of differing views. My approach is always one of communication, of understanding where people are coming from, of being informed, and of having as many stakeholders at the table as possible. You know, if you think about the decisions the Attorney General has to make when she decides to send a subpoena to a company, or to say, you know, for example, I am going to take on predatory mortgage lending practices. It's very important that you understand who that's going to impact and how how you're going to have the best effect in terms of deterrence. And so I've had experience doing that and reaching out and working with people on different sides of an issue. But at the end of the day, James, what's really important is that as Attorney General, you're guided by your principles and your values, and so you'll make decisions that you think are in the best interests of the public. But you know, I know that when we worked on the anti-bullying bill, there were people who had different views. Teachers, school administrators, parents, people who had been victims of bullying, people from communities of color, for example, in the NAACP who were concerned about disproportionate expulsion rates on pipeline to prison issues with the new law. It was really important that we had input from any number of people as that bill got drafted. That's just an example. So there's a lot of room for debate and discussion when you work in the Attorney General's office, because everything that the Attorney General does affects the lives of everyday people here in the state.
Thanks very much. And that concludes this part of the interview. You now have a minute for a closing statement.
Right. Well, thank you very much, James, and thank you for having me on this afternoon. It's great to be able to talk to all of you. September 9th is coming up, and that is primary day. And I am Maura Healey, Democratic candidate for Attorney General. I want to be your Attorney General because I want to use my experience as a civil rights attorney, as a litigator, as a former prosecutor, and as a leader and lawyer in the Attorney General's office, to use the powers of that office to make a difference in people's lives here in this state. I did that in our fight against DOMA. I did that in helping to lead and set up a anti-foreclosure program here in this state. I did that by suing and leading teams that took on predatory lending practices. And I did that by fighting for nationwide settlements for people with disabilities. Going ahead, we have a lot of challenges. I'll be an advocate to fight for women's access to reproductive health care. I'll fight to end gun violence. I'll fight to lead on criminal justice reform and so much more. Thank you.
We do want to thank Ms. Healey for participating in our conversation today. Please make your voice count by voting at the state primary on September 9th. For Arlington Public News, this is James Milan. Thanks for joining us.